Morning, everybody. How are you? Everybody okay? You're allowed to talk in church, eh? I remember as a kid growing up, if I used to even move in church, my mother used to prick me with a needle, eh? I'm glad my mom's not around right now, because you're allowed to talk, you're allowed to move, you're allowed to stand up. You can do anything you want to in church, okay? It's fun. Are you guys okay? It was nice and cold this morning. Seems that as the cloud cover came, the mist came over the valley, so it got colder and colder. So I was walking in the garden yesterday morning, and it's beautiful because I can now get to walk in a large garden and pray, spend some time with the Lord. And he showed me the trees. He drew my attention to some trees in the garden. And when I looked at the trees, there were some of them are evergreen, but some of them had absolutely lost all their leaves. And they looked like there was no life in those trees. Looked like there was no life. The branches and the twigs appeared to be dry, and the trees looked vulnerable. They looked exposed. They even looked naked, and they looked tired when I looked at the trees in the garden. So maybe you're in a season now, even today, where you have lost your leaves of joy. Maybe you feel dry. Maybe you feel vulnerable, exposed, naked, and tired. And you're not really sure how to navigate this season. Maybe it feels that there's an onslaught from the enemy. And as I looked at the trees, God reminded me that there is still life in those trees. And that all that needs to happen is the environment or the atmosphere needs to change. And it's the same for you and I. It might be that you feel there is no abundant life in me, and I'm feeling dry, and I feel like I've lost my leaves of joy. All that needs to happen for you and I, my friends, is that the environment and the atmosphere needs to change so that you can reflect the splendor for who you were created to be. And so the best advice I can give you, if you are facing an internal struggle, if you're facing some internal sort of wrestling in your spirit right now, the best advice I can give you this morning is give up. Maybe the enemy has highlighted some faults for you. Maybe the enemy has highlighted some faults, and he's lying to you by saying, hey, you're no good. You're going to suck at being a good mom. Maybe you're going to be a failure at work, and he's lying to you about these things. And maybe he's saying to you, you don't have what it takes to succeed. No one's going to trust you. The best advice and the best encouragement that I can give you, if you are struggling with sin, is to give up. The enemy loves to make you feel guilty, to make you feel inadequate, to make you seem like you're a failure. And he reminds you of your sin over and over. I was sitting this morning, and I haven't said this to Jeannie yet, but I was praying early this morning. And you know what was amazing? Because I know what I'm preaching on. And it was about 6 o'clock, 6:05 this morning. And I got into my quiet space alone, and I was just praying and talking to the Lord. And like an instant like this, the enemy reminded me of a sin I'd committed about 40 years ago. And I thought to myself, where does this thought come from? You know, I haven't even thought about that issue, and all of a sudden he's like throwing it up in my face again. And it's just so amazing that the enemy is going to come in and he's going to put thoughts into you and I, and what do we do with those thoughts matters. And the best advice I can give you, if the enemy comes in, give up. And obviously I don't mean give up to him. The best solution if you've got a struggling in your marriage, or maybe you've got rebellious kids and you don't know how to manage that space, the best advice I can give you this morning, friends, is give up. And as Karen said, I often give a lot of questions, and now there's lots of question marks in your minds, and that's a good thing. You may not be able to fix your struggling marriage. You might not be able to fix it. or your failing business. Maybe your farm is so deep in an overdraft you can hardly see the wood for the trees. My advice to you this morning, friends, is give up. The only explanation that I can give you for unanswered prayers regarding your health maybe your theology is being tested a little bit regarding a disease or an illness that you've been struggling with for years, and you haven't seen breakthrough, and you haven't seen change. The best advice I can give you this morning is give up. Giving up means to surrender, it means to yield, and it means to let it go. Let it go. Because frankly, you and I are no good at solving our own struggles on our own anyway. We can't do it on our own. We make an absolute mess of it anyway. So we might as well give up. We just make it worse. Because all we do is feed the monster with anxiety. We feed that monster with worry by overthinking a problem all the time. That's what we do. We are so good at giving problems airtime and space to allow them to fester in our hearts and in our souls that we become crippled, we become vulnerable, we become exposed, we become tired, and we look like a winter tree that has lost its leaves. My advice to you this morning, give up. Why can I say give up? Because Matthew 16 verse 24, Jesus says the same thing. It says, give up your own way and follow me. Give up your own way and follow me. If you hang on to your life, you're going to lose it. But if you give it up for my sake, it will be saved. It's a critical thing for you and I to learn in our walk with God, is that when we are faced with issues that we don't know how to navigate through, instead of being full of anxiety and worry and concern and giving it airtime and allowing it to fester in our hearts because I don't know what to do, instead of going down that road, give up. So much easier just to give it up and say, Jesus, I don't know what to do. I'm giving it to you. What makes Jesus the authority in life? Why go to Jesus? You must have heard, you must have seen people wearing a St. Christopher. Why don't you just go to St. Christopher? Why don't we just ask him? We know some people go to Mother Mary. So why don't we just go to Mother Mary? Why Jesus? What is so special about Jesus? Why is it critical for you and I to run into the arms of a loving Father? Why? I'm glad you asked that question. What qualifies Jesus as the Son of God? What qualifies him as the Son of God, as the final authority on life, or someone worth following? Why is Jesus worth following? You see, in the book of Hebrews, and you can turn to Hebrews chapter 3, chapter 4, and chapter 5, because that's the basis of where I'm preaching this morning. But in Hebrews, Paul refers to Jesus as our high priest. Yes, Karen. Jesus is our high priest. And if you read the Old Testament, you find that there were many high priests. So what is so special about Jesus? Because if you look at all the high priests in the Old Testament, from Aaron to Joshua to all the high priests, all of them failed. None of them were good enough. So what makes Jesus the perfect high priest for you and I? What makes him? Why don't we go to St. Christopher? And we know why. So this is a point I want to make. The responsibility of a high priest is to intercede on behalf of the people before God. That's the role of a high priest. To represent those who may be in a season where they've lost their leaves. You've lost your leaves of joy. You're looking a bit dry. You're looking a bit brittle. Jesus, our high priest, is praying for you right now. That's what the Bible tells me. You might have lost the meaning of life. And even for those who are successful in life, you might be feeling, I'm doing so well, I don't need God right now. And I'm telling you, friends, that even in that space, Jesus is interceding for you. Because it's easier, to sin in a place of absolute success than sometimes it is when we are struggling. Because when we're in a place of success and life is rosy and everything is going well with me right now, my natural instinct is to say, look at what I've achieved. Look at me. I'm doing well right now. I don't need God. And what I start to do, I get stuck into the sin of pride. And all other things start to manifest in my life because I think, well, everything is going great at the moment. I don't need God. And even in that moment, Jesus, our high priest, is praying for you and me. Isn't that beautiful? A high priest's responsibility is to intercede before the Father for those who are vulnerable, naked and tired, as well as for those who think they are self-made. And I think that's a sober thought. Because if everything is going well and hunky-dory at the moment, it's so easy to fall into the sin of pride and say, look how well I've done, good decisions I've made, my farm is flourishing, my business is succeeding, wow, look at how, and I forget my quiet time. And I forget the one who came running with a robe and a ring to save me. See, the problem with the high priest is that none of them in the Old Testament, none of the previous high priests could sacrifice themselves for mankind. None of them could. None of them were qualified to enter the Holy of Holies, die, and be raised again for the atonement of sin, because they were also imperfect and they also sinned. But Jesus is the only one who was tempted, yet did not sin. He died in your and my place. He was raised from the dead, and through that act of redemption, paid your and my debt in full. That qualifies him to be our high priest. For this reason, God honored, appointed, and called Jesus our high priest, the one who can sympathize with us because he's experienced everything that you and I go through in life. Nothing that you will experience in life, nothing, has been exempted from Jesus, or has he been exempted from. Jesus has experienced all kinds of pressures, intimidations, struggles that you and I go through in life, and for that reason he did not sin throughout that time, and for that reason he qualifies as a high priest. So, if you and I had to, as a church, Victory Church, we're going to put in an advert in the Craddock Adverteer because we're looking for a high priest. Sound good? So we're going to put an advert together now, and we're going to post it into the Craddock Adverteer, and we're going to say, looking for a high priest. So, high priest wanted. It's going to be our headline. Does that sound good? So if you look at Hebrews chapter 4 and chapter 5, it gives you an idea of what a high priest looks like. So what we're going to write on our advertisement is this: must understand human weakness. High priest that we're looking for must understand human weakness. And you find that in Hebrews 4 verse 15. Must have been thoroughly tested and never failed. Hebrews 4:15b. Must be chosen to represent mankind before God. Hebrews 5 verse 1. Must be willing to offer sacrifices for mankind's sin. Hebrews 5 verse 1b. Must be able to deal gently, and I love this part of a high priest. Must be able to deal gently with ignorant, wayward and rebellious people. Must be able to deal gently with us when we're wayward and rebellious and ignorant. Hebrews 5 verse 2. Hebrews 5 verse 4 says that a high priest must not pursue the honor of being a high priest. Hebrews 5 verse 4 to 5 says, must not assume he could become a high priest. Hebrews 5 verse 5 must be a choice candidate endorsed by God. None of us qualify, but quite sure you understand that, eh? Must eagerly offer loud cries and pleadings with tears to God who can rescue him from death. Hebrews 5 verse 7. The successful candidate must have a deep reverence for God. Hebrews 5 verse 7b. He must be willing to learn obedience through suffering. That qualifies Jesus to be a high priest. And must acknowledge that God qualifies him, that his qualification is not based on his works, not because Jesus did good works, doesn't qualify him as a high priest, nor his ability to function as a high priest, but it is God's choice alone that designated Jesus as your and my high priest. Can you imagine that is an advert in the Craddock Adverteer? How many people would put up their hand and say, yes, I'd like to fill that position, especially the part where he learned obedience through suffering? I think many of us are going, no, Francois and Roy are not worth it. Ted, no, I'm not sure. Not sure if Robin and Charles are worth me going through suffering for. Can you imagine that? But the beautiful part is that Jesus willingly accepted that role. You see, based on these qualifications, the only person who meets all the requirements of a high priest is Jesus Christ, the Son of God. It's the only one. You know, Corin was talking about, before praise and worship and afterwards, about you and I being saints. And how critical it is for you and I to understand who we are. Jeannie often talks, and she's even been talking to me again about this week, about identity. Friends, identity is absolutely critical to your right standing with God. Simply that you know who you are. And as Corin reminded us, we are saints. In other words, we are called apart from the world. We have been called apart. We have been set apart. Jesus says, let your light so shine that men around you can see that you belong to God. And so when you and I understand who our high priest is, that you and I have been called apart, my identity becomes clear, and I know who to run to, whether things are going well with me or whether things are going badly with me. I know who to run to because I know that I'm a saint. I'm called. You know, Hazel, he called you by name. You know that. He looked at you before you were born, the Bible says, and he said, Hazel, I have work for you to do. I'm calling you by name into my kingdom. Every single one of us sitting here today has been called by your name. You have been chosen. You have been elected by God. Not just so that you and I can have a cozy life and say, yeah, I'm saved. I'm in the palm of his hand and nothing will be able to snatch me from his palm. That is all true. But the reason why he called you, because there's a dying world that desperately needs to know about Jesus. Our high priest. So Jesus Christ is qualified. He's been designated and appointed as our high priest, our representative before the Father, offering us mercy and grace in our time of need. You got a time of need? Whatever it is, you're looking for grace, you're looking for mercy, run to the Father again and again and again and again. When you're facing a season where your leaves have fallen off and you're feeling vulnerable, naked, tired, exposed, your environment needs to change so that you begin to bear fruit again. To start that process of healing and restoration, you need to give up. And when you give up trying to fight and repair and fix the problem on your own, when you give that up and you run to your high priest who is constantly praying for you, praying that you won't sin, praying that you would be able to see it, that you will get it, that you would understand it and be able to walk in the fullness of what God has got for you, run to your high priest. Run to your high priest. Run to Jesus. You need to go to your high priest and ask for grace and ask for mercy to navigate the next season of restoration. And Paul also says something in Hebrews 4, verse 14 to 16. He says, since we have a high priest, so we've now determined that Jesus is our high priest and the only one qualified to be our high priest. And Paul says, since we have a high priest, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believed. And what is it that you and I believed? We believed salvation. We believed that Jesus Christ came, fully God, fully man, who gave himself up so that you and I could be reconciled to the Father. We believed that. Have you seen that with your own eyes? Has anybody physically seen Jesus when he was fully man? Has anybody seen him? No? How did you believe? Faith. Isn't that amazing? And that's what the world struggles with the most. It's not that they don't believe, it's that they don't want to believe. Because you and I exercise faith. And faith is the catalyst that enables you and I to believe Jesus is our high priest and that he's got everything good for you and for me. Paul also warns us in Hebrews 3 verse 12, make sure your hearts, and remember a couple of weeks ago we were speaking about the heart of man, and he says here, make sure your hearts are not evil and unbelieving. And that is a critical word for you and I. He says, he goes on in verse 12, he says, because unbelief turns you away from the living God. Unbelief. Therefore, since we have a high priest who can identify with our struggles, we can freely give up and enter his rest. When you are struggling with issues, when you are wrestling with something in your spirit and in your heart, whether it's on your farm, your business, your family, your marriage, your kids, doesn't matter what it might be. It might be a relationship with somebody. Whenever you are struggling inside here, my friends, can I tell you again, give up. Give up. Because you and I do not have the ability or the power or the knowledge to overcome that problem. But only he has. And when we give up, and we do as Jesus said in Matthew 16:24, only when you give up your life will you be able to save it. You and I need to learn what it's like to give up to Jesus. I've got a few statements I want to make on rest, on unbelief, and on faith. Okay? 5, 6, 7 of them. It'll go quite quickly. Unbelief robs you of rest. You and I know, and we've heard it before, that unbelief robs me of my joy. Absolutely does. But Hebrews 3:19 tells me that unbelief robs me of rest. The second point is that unbelief brings feelings of despair and hopelessness. If you're in a situation and you're feeling it's a bit hopeless, you're feeling a bit despair and despondent, unbelief has most likely crept in. It's time for you to run to the Father. Unbelief initiates feelings of being inadequate. When you don't make the grade, you're not good enough. It's unbelief. Unbelief is not caused by a lack of information or evidence. It's rather a failure to exercise faith. Faith is spiritual. It's something that we cannot see. How can I trust for something unless I see it? People don't understand that. If I go to gym and I train with weights, maybe after a few months you will see a change in my physical body. My biceps have got a little bit tighter and bigger. my pecs are standing out a little bit more. We can maybe see there's a difference. But faith and incremental results of faith, you can't see it. And so people say, how do you want me to believe in something I can't see? I cannot see your faith. I can't see your faith. I might be able to see results of your faith, but I cannot see the exercising of faith or you putting faith into action. You might have been trusting God for 10 years for something. I can't see that faith, but that's what it takes. Believing without seeing that Jesus is the high priest and knows everything about you and I. Number 6, unbelief is not informational or intellectual problem. It's a moral problem. Unbelief is a moral problem. Unbelief, you see, friends, is a problem of choice. I choose not to believe. I cannot believe. Jesus, honestly, has got an answer for this problem I've got in my marriage? I don't see it. I've been praying for 6 months and I've seen no change. Belief creeps in. And that's the moral choice I make. You know, remember weeks ago when I was talking about redefining hell? Again, we were talking about choices that you and I have that we can make. Either I'm going to accept Jesus fully, that means everything about him, or I'm going to reject him. And it's those who reject Jesus. Choice, moral choice we make, are the ones who will spend eternity without him. Total separation. So it's not that people don't believe, it's that people choose not to believe. I often think of the Living Waters YouTube channel, and I think I've said it to you before, but go and have a look sometimes, where Ray Comfort walks up and down the Venice Beach, I think is the Huntington Beach in California, and he just randomly talks to anybody. And you know, if he's been doing it for 20 years, there's probably, I don't know, I don't know the numbers, so I probably can't even guess the numbers. But literally every single time he is turned down. Every single time he goes and talks to people about Jesus, people make a choice to say, okay, yeah, I understand that stuff, but it's not for me. And you see, friends, it's a moral choice that you and I have. When I'm facing difficulties and I don't know what to do, give up, go to your high priest. It's a choice that you and I can make. Because when we go to our high priest, we know he is qualified to be able to intercede on our behalf before the Father, and he knows everything that you and I need. And so let's give up and run to the Father. The root cause of unrest in a man is his choice not to believe. It's interesting, isn't it? And unbelief will prevent you and I from entering into his rest. If you feel like a tree that is withered and it's lost its leaves, and you've lost your joy, and you're unsure about how to navigate a season right now, the biggest thing that you and I need, the most comforting thing that you and I need, is to be in a place of rest. And when your heart is in turmoil and your heart is fighting and struggling inside of you, you cannot be in a place of rest. And Jesus invites you and I into a place of rest. You know that God functions, Jesus functions from a platform of rest, from a platform of love, from a platform of kindness. Everything he does, he never ever gets anxious about you and I. He never gets anxious about the world. I was listening to something yesterday in a vision that somebody had, walking with God in a garden. It's a vision. They were walking with God in the garden, and they were complaining and saying to God, but the world is in such turmoil at the moment, so much unrest. Aren't you worried about it, Lord? And God just opened his hand, and there was this earth in the palm of his hand. And he said, don't worry, I got this. You see, everything Jesus does is from a platform of rest, from a platform of grace, from a platform of peace. He is never anxious about anything. He is always full of love, and every decision he makes is birthed and founded in love, in grace, and in rest. Imagine the decisions, or how different decisions and choices would be for you and I if we functioned from a place of rest. If you and I functioned from a place of peace, how would my choices be different? So giving up in both scenarios, when it's good and it's bad, and enter God's rest. If you're experiencing a season of blessing right now, and life is good for you right now, then again, friends, I want to encourage you to give up. If you're struggling in a life season where you've lost your leaves and it's a feeling that you're exposed and tired, again, I want to encourage you this morning to give up. Matthew 16:24, Jesus said, unless you give up your life and follow me, you will not be able to save it. And so it's critical for you and I to give up our own thoughts. Does that mean that we are now puppets managed by God, where He pulls a little string and we go, and He pulls another string and we wink, and He pulls another string and we run this way? No, it doesn't mean that. It just simply means the author of life, the giver of salvation, the one who created heaven and earth, is on my side. He is betting for me. He knows everything about me. He knows what's going to happen tomorrow, and He knows what's going to happen with me in the next 10 years. He knows everything. The Bible says that He knows the hair on your head. He knows your thoughts before you even think them. Why wouldn't I give up everything and run to my high priest who knows me well and who knows what is best for me, even when the times are good? And it might be even more so when you're tasting success in life and everything feels great. And we forget on quiet time. Things are going great at the moment with me, and so I haven't read my Bible for a week. And slowly we start to get into those areas of pride, even when it's going good. And that's why I want to remind you this morning, if you feel like a tree withered, you've lost all your leaves, or you feel that you're at a place where, wow, everything is going well at the moment, in both instances, friends, give up. In both instances, give up. Enter His rest, and you will learn that life with Christ is not about striving, but it's got everything to do with rest. Why don't you stand with me, please?